I thought I lost everything, but a shocking discovery changed everything. Ethan Carter's fingers trembled as he gripped his phone, the sharp voice on the other end slicing through the air like a blade. The words barely registered at first. An accident, Claire and Lily, the hospital. His breath caught in his throat, his mind resisting the weight of reality. He was in the middle of an assignment, knee-deep in a story that now felt meaningless. Without thinking, he bolted from his desk, knocking over a half-empty coffee cup as he rushed to his car. The engine roared to life, and he sped through the city streets, weaving recklessly through traffic, his heart hammering with every second that passed. Images of Claire's smile and Lily's laughter flashed before him. The way they had kissed him goodbye that morning, how Lily had begged for pancakes, how Claire had laughed, shaking her head at their daughter's endless energy. The simplicity of those moments now felt unbearable, as if they were mocking him with their fragility. By the time he reached the hospital, his legs felt numb. The cold sterility of the waiting room sent a chill through his spine as he searched for answers, his voice hoarse with desperation. The doctor's expression was unreadable, his words slow and clinical. Claire was alive, but unconscious, her body battered and fragile. The relief was fleeting because then came the crushing blow. Lily was missing. The word echoed in Ethan's mind, colliding violently with his thoughts. Missing, as if she had simply vanished in a thin air. The police stood nearby, their gazes heavy with unspoken truths. They believed she had been taken. Ethan's breath came in shallow gasps, the walls of the hospital closing in around him. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be real. He tried to steady himself, gripping the edge of a chair as if anchoring himself to something tangible. How could a child disappear from the site of an accident? Who would take her? His pulse pounded as he turned to the detectives, bombarding them with questions, but their answers were hollow, filled with uncertainty. They were investigating, reviewing traffic cameras, questioning witnesses, but so far there was nothing. Nothing. The next few days became a blur of sleepless nights and relentless searching. The police expanded their investigation, but no leads emerged. Ethan refused to sit idly by. He pored over every detail, combed through the news, and tried to trace the path of that car crash, looking for anything, any clue that could lead him to his daughter. But all he found was silence. The absence of answers gnawed at him, an endless abyss of uncertainty. The pain was unbearable, but the not knowing was worse. Every time he closed his eyes, memories of Lily flooded his mind. Her tiny hand wrapped around his finger, her sleepy voice calling for him in the morning, the way she would giggle uncontrollably when he lifted her onto his shoulders. He could still hear her laughter echoing through their home, except now, the house was empty. A ghost of the life they had before. Claire remained unconscious, locked away in a battle of her own, unable to offer the one thing Ethan needed, answers. And then, after what felt like an eternity, Claire woke. Ethan was at her bedside in an instant, his heart pounding with desperate hope. But she was weak, her eyes unfocused, her voice barely a whisper. He tried to be gentle, but the need for answers consumed him. "Claire, do you remember anything?" She struggled to form words, her breath shallow, and the look in her eyes nearly broke him. She didn't know. She didn't remember. The wreckage, the impact, the moments before Lily disappeared. It was all a haze. The doctors urged him to give her time, but time was a luxury he couldn't afford. His daughter was out there, somewhere, and every second that passed felt like another step away from her. Just as the weight of despair threatened to consume him entirely, a small envelope arrived at his doorstep. There was no return address, no sender, just a simple, unmarked envelope. With shaking hands, Ethan tore it open, his breath catching as he pulled out the contents. A photograph. His stomach clenched as he stared at the image, Lily, her eyes wide, her little hands clutching the edge of what looked like a wooden chair. She was alive. Relief surged through him, so powerful it nearly knocked him off his feet. But below the photo, scrawled in uneven handwriting, was a message that sent ice through his veins. "She's safe for now." his hands curled into fists, the paper crumpling between his fingers. Someone had taken her. Someone was watching him. The police warned him to stay out of the investigation, to let them handle it. But how could he? He was her father. His mind raced with possibilities, with the sickening realization that this wasn't random. Someone had planned this. Someone had stolen his daughter and was now toying with him. The fire inside him burned away the last traces of doubt. He had spent days drowning in helplessness, but now he had something. A lead, however small, and he wasn't going to wait for permission to act. Ethan Carter had built a career uncovering the truth, and now, the most important story of his life was unfolding before him. He had no choice. He would find his daughter, no matter what it took. Ethan's mind raced as he studied the photograph again, his fingers tracing the edges as if it held the key to everything. He memorized every detail, the dim lighting, the shadow of a chair in the background, the slight blur in the image. Someone had taken this photo deliberately. Someone wanted him to see her. But why? And why now? His pulse pounded with a mixture of fear and fury. Whoever had his daughter was playing a game, and he refused to be a passive player. The police advised him to hand over the letter immediately. They would analyze it, try to trace its origin, look for fingerprints. But Ethan had spent years as a journalist, chasing leads, piecing together fragments of truth from the smallest details. He knew how long these things could take, and every second wasted felt like another moment stolen from his daughter. He wasn't going to sit back and wait. He needed to act. Pushing through the exhaustion that clung to his body, he started gathering information. He retraced every step of Claire's day before the crash, searching for anything unusual. Had she mentioned anyone following her? Had she received any strange messages? But no matter how hard he searched, the truth remained just out of reach. At the same time, he refused to leave Claire's side. She was still weak, but he needed her to remember something, anything that could help. Each time he visited, he tried to mask his desperation, but Claire saw through it. She could see the torment in his eyes, the weight pressing down on his shoulders. "I'll find her," he whispered to her one night, gripping her hand tightly. "I swear I'll find her." Claire's lips parted, as if she wanted to speak, but the effort was too much. Her hand trembled in his grasp, and he felt a sharp pang of guilt. He needed to be strong for both of them. He had no other choice. And then, just as he was beginning to drown in frustration, a second envelope arrived. This time, it was slipped under his door in the middle of the night. No sound, no footsteps, just a whisper of paper on wood. When he picked it up, his heart pounded violently against his ribs. Inside was a single sentence, scrawled in the same uneven handwriting. "You're looking the wrong place." His breath hitched. What did that mean? Was it a taunt? A warning? He turned the note over, searching for something. Anything that could give him a clue. That was when he saw it. A grainy, low-quality image had been printed on the back. Security camera footage. A man, half turned away from the camera, holding a little girl's hand. His little girl, Lily. Ethan's vision tunneled as he zeroed in on the man's face. It was blurry, indistinct, but there was something familiar about him. A feeling he couldn't shake, as if he had seen this man before, but in a different life. He forced himself to calm down, to think rationally. He stared at the image for hours, his mind grasping at fragments of memory, trying to place the shape of the man's face, the way he carried himself. And then, like a sudden crack of lightning, a name surfaced in his mind. Daniel Mercer. The realization sent a shiver through Ethan's spine. The name wasn't his, not exactly. It belonged to someone Claire had buried in her past. A man she never spoke about. A man she had once been engaged to. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs as the pieces began to fall into place. Claire had left Daniel years ago after discovering the truth about him, his dangerous connections, his involvement in human trafficking. She had walked away, severed ties, and never looked back. But what if he hadn't? What if Daniel had never let her go? His blood ran cold. Ethan stared at the image of his daughter, her small fingers wrapped around the hand of a man she had never met. Or had she? Had Daniel been watching all these years? Waiting? Ethan's fists clenched. If Daniel thought he could take his daughter, If he thought he could break them, he was wrong. He had underestimated Ethan Carter. With renewed determination, Ethan knew what he had to do. He wasn't just going to search for Lily anymore. He was going to hunt down the man who took her. And he wouldn't stop until he brought his daughter home. Ethan buried himself in Claire's legal files, his fingers flipping through pages at a frantic pace. Case after case, he searched for any connection, any clue that might explain who had taken Lily. Claire had spent years exposing corruption, dismantling powerful organizations that thrived in the shadows. Had someone from her past come back for revenge? The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through him. But despite hours of combing through names and case details, he found nothing concrete. No threats, no loose ends, just a trail of powerful enemies who had long since faded into the darkness. Frustration gnawed at him. The official investigation was moving too slowly, and every moment without Lily felt like another breath stolen from his lungs. His desperation pushed him beyond legal boundaries. He started searching places the police wouldn't, making calls to people he once swore he'd never deal with. Old contact from his years as a journalist, individuals who operated in the gray areas of information. But even they came up empty. It was as if Lily had vanished into thin air. Then, another envelope arrived. The same thick, off-white paper. The same jagged handwriting. His hands trembled as he tore it open. "You're looking in the wrong place. Dig deeper, Ethan." His pulse quickened. Attached to the note was a grainy security camera photo. He squinted at the blurred image. Lily, small and fragile, clutching the hand of a man whose face was partially obscured. Ethan's heart clenched. She was alive, but the sight of her in a stranger's grasp filled him with a burning rage. There was something about the man, something disturbingly familiar. Ethan stared at the image for what felt like hours, trying to force his brain to make the connection. He knew this person, but from where? The answer lurked just beyond his reach, taunting him. Determined, he dove into Claire's past, searching through old photographs, personal documents, anything that might trigger a memory. And then he found it. A name. A man Claire never spoke about. Daniel Mercer. Ethan's chest tightened as he read through the fragmented details. Claire had once been engaged to him, years before they met. She had buried this part of her life so deeply that even Ethan had never known. Why? His fingers moved over the page, following the words like they held the key to everything. Claire had left Daniel after uncovering the truth about him, his involvement in human trafficking, his ties to the darkest corners of the world. She had walked away and never looked back. Daniel had vanished, leaving no trace. Until now. Ethan's blood ran cold as he picked up the security footage again. His hands trembled as he digitally overlaid the old photos of Daniel Mercer onto the image of the man holding Lily's hand. The shapes aligned. The angles matched. It was him. Daniel had taken Lily. A slow, suffocating fear crept into Ethan's chest. This wasn't a random act. This wasn't about money or revenge from Claire's legal work. This was personal. A ghost from the past had come back, reaching into their lives, tearing his daughter away. Ethan forced himself to breathe, to push past the terror clawing at his throat. He had to find Daniel, but there were no official records, no paper trails. Daniel had erased himself. He was living under a false identity, hidden in plain sight. But Ethan was relentless. He spent sleepless nights tracking the smallest clues, piecing together whispers of information until he found what he was looking for. Daniel was out there, and Ethan was getting closer. Then the phone rang. Ethan froze, the number unlisted. He hesitated for only a second before answering. Silence. Then a voice low, steady, eerily calm. "You took something from me," Daniel said. "Now, I take something from you." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but Daniel was in control. His words dripped with quiet malice, taunting, deliberate. He didn't reveal where Lily was, only that Claire owed him a debt, and Ethan was going to pay for it. The call ended, leaving only a hollow dial tone and a crushing silence. Ethan turned to the police, presenting the security footage, the letters, the evidence he had gathered. But without proof of Lily's exact location, the authorities wouldn't act. He watched their skeptical eyes, their careful, measured words. His patience snapped. The law had failed him. The system that was supposed to protect families like his was caught in bureaucracy, shackled by rules and regulations. Ethan was done waiting. If no one else would bring his daughter home, he would, and he wouldn't stop until he did. Ethan no longer cared about rules. The system had failed him, leaving him to fight alone. His mind burned with one singular purpose: getting Lily back. He gathered every piece of information he had on Daniel, tracing his movements through obscure records, surveillance footage, and whispers from the underworld. He was relentless, hunting through the cracks of society, following every lead, no matter how dangerous. Days blurred into nights as Ethan scoured the city, his exhaustion mounting but his resolve unshaken. Then, finally, a breakthrough. An old informant, someone Ethan had once exposed in an article but who now owed him a favor, provided him with a crucial piece of information: a location. A warehouse on the outskirts of a city, long abandoned, recently leased under a false name. Ethan's gut twisted. Daniel was there. Fueled by desperation, Ethan drove into the night, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had no plan, no backup, only the knowledge that his daughter was somewhere in that building. He parked a few blocks away and moved on foot, his pulse hammering in his ears. The warehouse loomed ahead, silent and ominous, its metal walls rusted and scarred by time. He crept closer, scanning the area. A single light flickered inside. He could hear the faint hum of a generator, the slow creak of metal shifting in the wind. He pressed himself against the outer wall, taking a slow, measured breath. Then, carefully, he peered through a grimy window. And there she was, Lily. His breath hitched. She was curled up on a makeshift cot, clutching a worn stuffed animal, her small frame trembling. The sight nearly broke him. But before he could move, he saw the figure standing nearby. Daniel. Ethan's rage ignited. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay focused. Storming in without a plan would put Lily at risk. He had to be smart, controlled. He reached into his pocket, gripping the burner phone he had brought, and sent a single text to Claire. "I found her. Call the police." Then he moved. He slipped through the side door, keeping low, his heartbeat a deafening roar in his ears. He edged closer, his eyes locked on Lily, but Daniel turned before he could reach her. Their eyes met, and a slow, knowing smile crept across Daniel's face. "You really think you can take back what's mine?" Daniel murmured. His voice was smooth, unsettlingly calm. Ethan didn't waste words. He lunged. They collided, crashing into a metal shelving unit. Tools clattered to the ground as they struggled, fists colliding, raw desperation fueling every movement. Daniel was strong, but Ethan had something he didn't: unbreakable determination. He fought with everything he had, ignoring the pain, the bruises, the blood. Then, a sound, a distant wail of sirens. Daniel's smug expression faltered. The police were coming. Enraged, he made a final, reckless move, shoving Ethan back and reaching for Lily. But Ethan was faster. He threw his entire weight into Daniel, slamming him into the ground. Daniel let out a pained grunt, but before he could recover, flashing lights flooded the warehouse. The police stormed in. Daniel's face twisted with fury as officers restrained him, his screams of protest drowned out by the chaos. Ethan barely noticed. He was already kneeling, pulling Lily into his arms. She clung to him, sobbing into his chest. "Daddy," she whispered. Ethan held her tighter, pressing his lips to her hair. "I've got you, baby. I've got you." The nightmare was over, but the scars would remain. Back at the hospital, Claire met them at the entrance, tears streaming down her face as she embraced them both. Ethan could feel her trembling, the weight of everything they had endured crashing down on them all at once. But they were together. That was all that mattered. Later, as Lily slept safely in her bed, Ethan and Claire sat in silence. There was something unspoken between them, a truth lingering in the air. Finally, Claire broke. "There's something I need to tell you," she whispered. Ethan braced himself. Claire took a shaky breath. Daniel, he told you Lily wasn't yours, didn't he? Ethan's jaw tightened. He nodded. Claire's eyes filled with pain. He lied. Ethan's heart stilled. I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid that if you knew about my past, if you knew what I'd been running from, it would destroy everything we built. I should have told you, Ethan. I should have trusted you. Ethan let out a slow breath, the weight of doubt lifting from his shoulders. He had almost let Daniel poison him with lies, almost let his mind fracture under the weight of uncertainty. But looking at Claire now, he saw the truth, not just in her words, but in the depth of her regret, in the love that had never wavered. He reached for her hand. No more secrets, he said. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. No more secrets. The next few weeks were filled with healing, with quiet moments of reflection, with the slow process of rebuilding what had been shattered. Lily was safe. Their family was whole. And though the past would never be erased, they would not let it define them. Months later, standing on the shore of the beach where they had once laughed without worry, Ethan watched the waves roll in, Claire's hand in his, Lily's laughter carried by the wind. He had thought he lost everything, but in the end, he had discovered something far greater, an unbreakable love, a strength he never knew he possessed, and a future worth fighting for. Ethan moved through the dense forest, his breath clouding in the cold night air. The cabin stood ahead, a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky. Every muscle in his body was wound tight, his heart hammering with anticipation and fear. He had spent weeks chasing shadows, following leads that led to dead ends. But this time, he knew. This was it. Lily was inside, his fingers clenched into fists as he approached the door, his mind racing. He couldn't afford to hesitate. With one forceful kick, the door burst open. The creaking wood gave way to darkness, and then a single dim lantern illuminated the center of the room. Ethan's stomach clenched at the sight before him. Daniel stood calmly, his arm wrapped around Lily's small frame. She looked pale, terrified, her eyes wide as they locked onto Ethan's. His heart shattered at the fear in her face. Daniel smirked, tilting his head slightly. "Took you long enough," he said, his voice almost amused. "I knew you'd come." Ethan forced himself to stay steady, though rage coursed through him. "Let her go." Daniel's grip tightened on Lily. "You think you know the truth," he mused. "But Claire never told you everything, did she?" He leaned in slightly, his voice soft, taunting. "Lily, she might not even be yours." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The words slashed through him like a knife. For a brief moment, the room seemed to tilt. Was Daniel telling the truth? Had Claire lied to him? Doubt, sharp and insidious, crept into his mind. But then Lily whimpered, reaching for him with trembling hands, and the uncertainty shattered. It didn't matter what the DNA said. She was his daughter. She always would be. His gaze hardened. "I don't care what you say. She's mine." Daniel's smirk faltered for the first time. The satisfaction in his expression wavered, replaced by something darker. "You always did think you could take what wasn't yours." His fingers twitched, and Ethan saw the shift before it happened. Daniel moved first, yanking Lily back as he reached for something. Ethan didn't wait to find out what. He lunged, colliding into Daniel with full force. The room erupted into chaos. Lily screamed. Furniture crashed to the floor, and the walls trembled with the force of their struggle. Ethan fought with everything he had, his knuckles cracking against Daniel's jaw, his own ribs aching from a retaliating blow. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Daniel was stronger than he looked, fueled by something twisted and personal. But Ethan had something stronger, desperation, fury, and a father's love that burned hotter than anything else. He forced Daniel back, grappling for control, but then Lily cried out, and Daniel wrenched her away, stumbling toward the door. Ethan's world tunneled. He pushed himself up, ready to charge again, when suddenly, sirens, flashing red and blue lights, painted the walls, and voices boomed from outside. "Police! Drop your weapon!" Daniel stiffened. His grip on Lily faltered for half a second, just enough for an officer to break in and seize him. Lily was wrenched from his grasp, her small body scooped up in safe arms as Daniel screamed in rage, thrashing against the officers. Ethan didn't hear the rest. He was already moving, already catching Lily as she was past him, holding her so tightly he never wanted to let go. She sobbed into his chest, her tiny hands gripping his shirt, as if afraid he would disappear. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice broken. Ethan's throat tightened. "I've got you, baby. I've got you." Outside, the chaos dimmed. Claire arrived moments later, running toward them, her face streaked with tears. She fell to her knees beside them, her hands trembling as she touched Lily's hair, her fingers brushing Ethan's arm. The nightmare was over, but its scars would remain. Days later, the truth came. DNA results. Ethan barely breathed as he unfolded the paper, his hands clammy. And then, relief. The confirmation that Lily was his. Daniel had lied. The realization left him numb. Had it been a desperate attempt to break him? A final, cruel manipulation? It didn't matter. Ethan already knew the truth. Claire stood beside him, silent, waiting. Then, finally she broke. "I should have told you everything," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I was afraid of what you'd think of me, afraid of losing everything." Her eyes searched his. "But I never doubted that Lily was yours." Ethan exhaled slowly. The anger was there, coiled in his chest, but so was something else. He could see it in Claire's face, the weight of guilt, the love she had never stopped carrying. He could hold on to the bitterness, let it fester. Or he could let it go. His fingers brushed hers. "No more secrets," he said softly. Claire's breath hitched, and she nodded, her tears falling freely. No more secrets. Months passed, and though the memories of that night would never fully fade, they found something resembling peace. Standing on the beach, the sun warm on their skin, Ethan watched Lily run ahead, her laughter carried by the waves. Claire stood beside him, her fingers laced with his, their bond reforged, stronger than before. Ethan had thought he lost everything, but in the end, he had gained something far greater. Unbreakable love, the power of forgiveness, and the strength to survive the unimaginable.